Good morning, everyone. I think I've quit shivering enough that I might be able to speak. We've all been puritized and baptized and whatever else that flurry was. And I was really impressed, where is Jyoti, with her reading how many allusions there were to all of what's been going on here this morning. Somehow she was certainly using her intuition long before we arrived. I'd like to start this morning by telling two stories, both of them true. The first one is a story that Ananda told about an experience that her husband, Swami Bharat, most of us in the room know him. He was also known as Joseph Cornell, as his professional name, if you will. He's a very, very well-known naturalist and was called upon many times to go and teach really all over the world. But in this instance, he was on a trip to Pennsylvania, and he gave a workshop there. He was giving a workshop, so he was being hosted by somebody in Pennsylvania who had admired his work. So he was in this man's home for a couple of days, and he would pray over his food, and he would, of course, sit to meditate a couple of times a day. And then he went and he gave this 2-day workshop. And at the end of the workshop, his host said to him, right before he was getting ready to leave, "Would you come upstairs with me?" So Joseph went upstairs, and the man said, "I'd like to pray." And he was surprised. He didn't know this man called himself a born-again Christian. That's how he referred to himself. So his prayer was, "Dear Lord, Joseph is a really good man. He loves you very much. So could you please make a one-time exception and allow him into heaven?" Of course, Bharat got a kick out of that, but that's a true story. Another story is a story that a friend of Jyotish and Devi's told them, that they were on a trip. They went to Medjugorje, which is, of course, known because so many people there have apparitions of Divine Mother in the form of Mary. And most of us know about it because there were, I think, 4 of these young girls who started having apparitions at a very young age and were there, and they would share their stories, but they kept coming to them. Of course, they weren't believed at first, but eventually everybody could see that they were really seeing Mary in form. And this man, this friend of Jyotish and Devi's, who went on this trip, said that somebody, one of those young girls who was now an older woman, was there present in Medjugorje. And so somebody in their group asked her, "What do you think about the statement or the belief that only Catholics go to heaven?" And she looked at her, this woman who's been receiving Mary for many years, and she said, "There are no Catholics in heaven." And everybody just gasped. There were many Catholics on the trip. But then she said, "There are only people in heaven who have loved God. There are Catholics in heaven. There are Christians in heaven. There are Jews in heaven." And she went on, and she said, "But really, the underlying commonality is that they love God." But really, both of those stories speak so clearly to the dogmatism part of our reading today, of just how easy it is to buy into that which we've been taught. And it's very subtle. It's not, I'm not speaking to say like, "Oh, look at what happens to them." No, because it happens to all of us Swamiji was speaking one time, and he was referring to his experience of being, as he calls it, booted out of SRF. And he describes the experience. Many of us know he was called back from India, and he said I thought his humor is so delightful, but he said they met me in New York, conveniently 3,000 miles away from Los Angeles, and told me that I needed to leave SRF. And he talked for a couple of minutes about just how painful that was for him. He said, of course it was painful. And then he said, but I soon came to realize that it was the greatest blessing in my life. He said, because had I stayed, I probably would have just done what I was told, behaved like everyone there behaved. He said, really primarily because I'm so loyal. Loyalty, of course, being a great spiritual quality, but he was saying how easy it might have been for him to not rise to all of really what Yogananda had asked of him, that his creativity might not have just come through him. Couldn't think of the word, I still didn't, but good enough. The way it did, in all the ways that it did, that we all know, books, music, and onto communities. I mean, he said in that talk, all of what you see here, these are Swami's words, just wouldn't be here. But just referring to how easy it is. I mentioned many times that I was born and raised Jewish and very involved in Judaism. I loved it. There's a lot about the culture and parts of it about the families and the music. There's many delightful aspects to Judaism, but then eventually I was called away, as is obvious. But I'm struck by two things about that. One is, and I didn't know this, but the very strong anti-Christ feelings that I had as a result of how I was raised in what I think was, at that point, a pretty traditional Jewish upbringing. So anything about Christ was hard. And I've mentioned how much courage it took once when I needed to walk into a Christian bookstore. I was going to go in to buy a Christian friend a gift. But it really freaked me out to have so much Christ and saints and Mary and all of those images around me. And here's what's interesting. I had hardly ever, other than the way one does in the world, in a book or in a movie, but not ever at the synagogue, heard about Christ, seen an image of Christ, but it was a lot of the dogmatism that came through not just my synagogue, but a lot of the Jewish teachings at the time. And I've had this experience with many of my friends who have come here, friends that I've had since childhood. They love these teachings. They love me. They still want to call me to share all of the highs in their life, or when they're having problems. They want me there, and whatever ability these teachings have given me to counsel them. But almost to the person, they cannot come here. They can't look at this altar. It's a very powerful thing, the way dogmatism comes to us constantly in so many ways. Swamiji says it's not just in religion. We find it in science, we find it in philosophy. I can never give the talks that Swamiji gave. They're his talks. I don't know enough about the philosophers, but boy, does he have a lot of words to say about a lot of the most well-loved and highly regarded philosophers, saying, where is the truth in what they're saying. Where was the truth for me? Who had real truth as I was growing up? And I would bet for many of you, not just in my synagogues, but in your churches or your temples, wherever you were, how many times did we hear things? Some of it sounded very smart. A lot of it sounded smart. But that vibration of truth, I didn't have these words at the time. Maybe many of you who are sitting here now wouldn't exactly have words for what had you leave wherever you were and allow yourself to be drawn here, allow yourself to receive these teachings, because these teachings are there. And of course, many people in the world aren't flocking here, but something happened. And for me, without my knowing it, I don't feel like I was all that smart about it, but my soul was longing for something. Whether I would have called it that or not, my soul was longing for that which Swami speaks about in these readings. This is a very powerful reading. When I first read it yesterday morning, I thought, what am I going to talk about? It's pretty clear, dogmatism or common sense. Who's going to say, oh no, I won't use common sense? Who would say that? But it's a much deeper teaching than that, in part because of what Swamiji says in this teaching when he says, common sense comes first, but as it deepens, as it's refined, it turns into intuition. We move it. The more we're willing to listen to ourselves, listen to what we feel in our heart, not when we're emotional, that will certainly lead us astray, but if we can calm ourselves, if we can calm our heart and listen, which is of course why Jesus Christ kept saying over and over, for those who have ears to hear, and we know we listen with our heart, and then constantly offer that which we find there up into our meditation, into our prayers, sitting in front of a picture of the masters, to offer it up and say, this is what I'm feeling. I'd like some guidance about it, because something else Swamiji said in this talk that I was listening to, he said, we can all go wrong and be deluded. This is scary, the second part of this sentence, in an infinite number of ways. So that's not just humbling, but it is a little frightening, because we're all here because we want to be more and more and more guided by intuition. But what care do we need to take to make sure that it's true intuition? Because the ego is very good at what it does. There's two things that just happened that coincidentally happened with this reading. One is that Tuesday night is the anniversary of the Maha Samadhi of Yogananda, the Maha Samadhi, that final exit of the soul from a body. I think in his case it wasn't really final, because that had already happened, and he's already told us that he'll come back again, but he's coming back as an avatar. But it's a great moment when one as great as Yogananda leaves his body, and he has said himself, which I've shared now a lot since Christmas, because it really struck me that he said around birthdays and around the conscious exiting of the body by these high saints, their energy is even more present, more accessible to you. So he was saying to us, on those days, be open, try and test your intuition on those days. I say it because of any of the times that we would find ourselves in this temple. Master's birthday, his Mahasamadhi, Swamiji's birthday, his final exit of the body. These are times where we really want to be here, because what were Master's words to Swamiji? When Swamiji asked him, "Sir, after you've gone, will we be able to feel you as we feel you now?" And he said, "For those who think me near, I will be near." He was saying, believe in that. Trust that I will be there. Open your hearts to this guidance, because this is what makes this reading deeper than how it appeared to me at the beginning. But before I finish that, I want to say last week, we had a class with the students who are going through discipleship training right now. So they're part of their classes. They've gone through Raja Yoga. The next part is this, I think it's a 6-week course in discipleship. Really just living more and more and more with these teachings and trying to feel for themselves or know, is this my path? Am I a disciple of Yogananda and of these masters? And the topic on Thursday night was attunement. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever tried to do this, but it's not easy to talk about attunement, because attunement happens just like common sense moving to intuition, ultimately to perfect attunement beyond mind. We have to get out of our mind to be able to feel attunement, and yet here we are teaching and using words and certainly hoping to appeal to everybody's heart who's there, to be inspiring enough that without understanding, better without understanding. But again, we're speaking, we're giving a talk. It's a complicated dynamic, if you can imagine. Help them feel in their hearts a big yes, not necessarily that this is their path, because if this is their path, Master will come and get them. If not right now, later in life. If not later in life, next time or time after that. If you belong here, you'll be brought here. But even the understanding that to move towards that place of common sense, as this Bible quote is speaking of it, we need a guru. We must have a guru. We must have a real teacher who has the ability and the deep desire and the love to go with it, to change us through vibration, not through words, because they're not trying to change our mind. They're hoping to change our consciousness. We're hoping to change our consciousness. That's why we're here. So to have that shift in consciousness, we need to be in places where we are open to receiving, touched by that vibration that only one who has lived in it can bring. This was the shortcoming for me of my spiritual upbringing, which didn't feel bad. It did not feel bad at the time. But finally, I realized I was listening to a lot of very intellectual beings who cared about us, but they didn't have that vibration that goes beyond words. They didn't have that in them that I could offer them a question, a dilemma, silently or out loud, but to keep coming back there and seek guidance beyond words. That wasn't going to come. When I met some rabbis in Israel who were part of the Kabbalah tradition, I said to them, what happened? I was born and raised in synagogues. I loved them. I was there constantly, very involved. I was a practicing Jew, but I never heard of this. How could that be? And they looked at me and they said, the world wasn't ready for it again yet. They were referring to the yugas. And so by admission, of course we know that because we're coming out of Kali Yuga and into Dwapara Yuga. And so Jesus started this teaching by putting the vibration out. It then got written in the Bible and got called Christianity. Krishna came and did it, and it went into the Gita and became Hinduism. But I think it's important for us to remember that these great teachers come not to start a new religion. They come to bring us spirituality. That's what they're doing. They come to touch our souls and our spirits. And then as time goes by, sometimes it doesn't even take any time, their students who misunderstand a lot of the teachings create a religion. This is why Master said of Jesus, Christ was crucified once, but his teachings are being crucified every day because they're being shared, not by highly enough evolved, spiritually liberated teachers, but rather more from the intellect, where we can't learn this. I wanted to share something that Swamiji wrote. I just was reminded myself on my notes about a little story that I'll share, sort of apropos of nothing at this moment in the talk, but it popped into my eyes and it's good, so I'll share it. This is a true story, but I don't remember the name of the student who was well known or the name of the saint who was well known. But this student met this great saint and spent some time with him. And then at some point he said to him, surely you're my guru. And the saint said, oh no, I'm not your guru. Yogananda is your guru. And this student said, but Yogananda's dead. And the saint said, oh no, you have it all wrong. You're dead. You're dead. Yogananda's very much alive, really sharing. The vibration of consciousness doesn't go anywhere, hence our ability to tune into it. And really, in some ways, when we talk about dogmatism, and I mentioned before that Swamiji has many examples of where it exists in science and in philosophy and certainly in religion. The one thing, and this is what I want to read to you in a minute in Swamiji's own words, that we can always come back to within ourselves when we're questioning that, or either questioning, do we need a guru, or forgetting to hold things up, just moving with this great assurance that something's our intuition or sharing knowledge that we have. How often do we remember to ask for guidance? When I was in medical training, and I don't do this now, but it came to my mind just this minute because it's perfect. Really, in some ways, how can we all do this? I had a note on my clipboard, and I said, never enter one room without God. Do not enter a room without God. Who would want to go and have people's lives, to be responsible for people's lives without God and Guru with you? Of course not. What Jesus said to his students over and over, and what Master said that is so important, is let's follow the dictates of science. Let's ask ourselves, what is the proof here? Is this accurate? What either is coming up in me that I'm offering up, or what they're telling me? How can we know that? And let me just read to you what Swamiji wrote. This is in a commentary, actually not on this reading today, but nonetheless relevant. He says, to Nicodemus, Jesus stated, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, we speak that which we do know." They're talking about knowing it because they're living it, and testify that which we have seen. He asked of people, this is Jesus, he's referring to Jesus, only that they keep their hearts and minds open and not confuse rational deductions with intuitive perception. Not an easy thing to do. Sounds easy. When we're sitting here, it sounds easy on a Sunday morning when we're focused on it. But it's not. Our minds jump in and tell us. So to remember always, I want to offer this up into your illuminating presence. Shine your light on it. And then, to as many as received him, to them gave he the power. Let me be open to receive your wisdom. I've held this up, now you tell me. And then Swamiji goes on to say, science asked, does it work? Jesus told people to ask this same question of spiritual teachings. If someone questions the truth of a scientific assertion, he is told to perform the experiments to find out for himself. This is what Swamiji wrote. Jesus said, this has been my experience. Do what I've done and see whether you experience it. And then he says, if you don't want to spend all of the time doing the experiments that I've spent, how many lifetimes? He's now free. If you don't want to do that, he says, I propose then study its fruits in the lives of others. You know, in a very lesser, in some ways. Well, I don't want to say that. I've often said here, and I mean it, if you're new, if you're just coming, pay attention to the looks on the faces of the people who mostly tend to sit up front. People who have been coming for a long time, feel them. If you meet somebody who's been on a path, how do they feel to you? Do you feel that they have learned something, absorbed something, or moving in such a way that you love being near them, that you'd like to be more like them? Because chances are it's not them, but the teachings that are coming through them. So ask yourself that. And if it feels good, do the experiment that Jesus is suggesting. Master always said, he says it clearly over and over about the type of meditation we do, Kriya. Kriya is a science. You can prove its worth. You have to do the experiment. And the experiment, of course, requires following these teachings. And this is, I'll end with this now, Swamiji's words again. In fact, he says, this grand experiment has been carried out far more thoroughly than in any modern physics, uncounted thousands of times in every century, in every great religion, and in every country on earth. And unlike the experiments of science, this one has never been contradicted, never changed or qualified, and in every case has proved beyond every possibility of error. Those are powerful words that Swamiji spoke, and they ring of truth. Every great religion has done this experiment already, and never once, as Swamiji says in his own words, these are not his words, do we ever hear of a great teacher saying, you know what, in this lifetime, start lying a little bit, it's fine. Go ahead and cheat somebody. No, they never do that. They hold the same exact spiritual principles up. And time and again and again and again, in every religion, as Swamiji says, we find it to be true. Attune yourself to the vibration of a true master, and we will all receive everything we think we want now. Everything. And if physically, materially, it doesn't come to us, suddenly we'll feel satisfied without it if we are attuning ourselves to this vibration. And as Jesus said, just try it. What's to lose here, really? Everything your heart desires, your heart calmed, peaceful, quiet, still, everything it wants. God bless you.
Let's take a moment.
If you're seeking freedom in a revolution, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For once the guns stop blazing, you'll find it amazing how the world can drag on just as before. If you're seeking freedom in a marble mansion, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For even when it's sunny, you'll be counting money, keeping up that showcase your face lined with care. And if you're seeking freedom on a throne of power, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For though men all obey you, what if they betray you? Tends to be unwaiting for foes everywhere. But if you're seeking freedom, cast away desires, by barter like a beggar, you've wealth everywhere. For never can you buy it, grasp and you'll deny it. Freedom can't be hoarded, it's free as the air. And if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains. Got sunlight on your shoulders, the wind in your hair. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere.